Should I play Earl Memnon? He seems simple enough, and his old man eyes are kind of comforting in a weird way. Ugh, no, maybe I should play Paul. Oh god, I'm taking too long to pick my leader again. Everyone's glaring at me. If only there was some sort of resource to help me understand the power level of all of these different leaders. Don't worry, you've come to the right place. Today, Lannister and I will be presenting a combined tier list of the different leaders in Dune Imperium. These rankings assume you'll be playing a game of Dune Imperium with the Immortality and Rise of Ix expansions. If you'd like a tier list including just Rise of Ix, it will be linked in the description below. With that said, let's get to it. The first leader for our combined rankings. So this is going to be the bottom of F tier, and this is going to be our poor friend Memnon. Yeah, he finds himself down here once again, unfortunately. There is a reason he's called the meme leader. What was your individual ranking for him?
My individual ranking was also an F.
Mine was as well. I did have him at the top of F for what it's worth. He wasn't my lowest ranked leader, but he was down there for sure.
He does decent things, but other leaders just do it so much better and so much more often. It's clear as night and day for anybody. Like anyone can win with anything, but the distinction between the two is just ginormous, I would say.
Yeah. And before I forget, just to remind everybody what Memnon's abilities are. His base ability is called Connections. When you take a High Council seat, which is the 5 Solari action that gives you 2 Persuasion every round, you get a free bump with any faction. And the Signet Ring ability is you just gain 1 spice. So pretty basic abilities overall. And so basic that I will usually recommend him to newer players starting out because it doesn't require a lot of planning. You pretty much just get some spice along the way, which can help kind of fill in the gaps for things that you might not be planning for. And then the bump's just a cherry on top if you grab your High Council seat. What do you think some of Memnon's strengths are?
His spice acquisition makes it easier for him to hit the Conspire play a lot quicker. There are moves that you can do to kind of set yourself up. So for instance, if the first combat happens to be 1 spice for 3rd place, for example, if you go here and you have your ring, that's 2 spice acquired. So you'll have 2. And assuming you can secure the 2nd place, that's 4. Next round you can go to Conspire. And why Conspire matters in this instance is because, as you know, when you go to his High Council, he gets a free bump. So this kind of sets up bigger card purchase plays and allows you access to shipping. So there are times and worlds where he can get access to shipping sooner. So if there's mem quarters, he can directly hit here and grab mem quarters to get the bump. And the other play is if that's not there, then you can try and hit the Conspire zone as quickly as possible to buy higher power cards. So he's a little bit stronger in Immortality because there are so many strong cards, and there's no longer a thing as a dead row. If there's a dead row, you can just bomb it. So he has that ability to power up a lot more quickly. Also, he has the ability to get to shipping very quickly with a card like this. You see Guild Impersonator. If you gain spice this turn, you gain this base and guild bump. And what do you know? His Signet Ring happens to give him 1 spice. So that goes in conjunction with it. You can play it anywhere, and you can get that bump, and it pretty much facilitates his ability to get shipping really quickly.
And I think that's a good point about the early Conspire play to High Council, because a lot of the times early High Council can be very, very good. Especially Memnon's obviously has a little extra incentive because they get that bump. But the deck building aspect in Immortality is just so much stronger now. There are so many really powerful cards that do cost a little bit more. And even the cheaper ones that are very powerful. Being able to acquire a couple of those or blow up the row and see if you can get something good. A very underutilized early play, I think. And we probably should be seeing more early High Councils, especially in Immortality. Going along with the Signet Ring ability, Earl Memnon is one of the leaders that benefits from the ability to grab an early 2-cost tech card starting out. So the Signet Ring giving 1 spice. And then you can head on over to Tech Negotiation, which gives another spice discount and allowing you to get one of the nice 2-cost tech cards. So there's some good ones in there. Memo Quarters is very good for getting an extra bump. The one that gives Persuasion is also very powerful early on just for the deck building aspect of things. I think that ends up being a common play. There are a couple other leaders that do that, and so it's not unique to Memnon, but it is something to keep in mind when playing with him. If we want to jump into some weaknesses of Memnon, I guess my main weakness is that the base ability, getting a spice, you're drawing into your Signet Ring, like maybe 3 to 4 times throughout the entire game. You have to commit to playing the Signet Ring every time you get it, which is sometimes hard because there are other things you want to do, like go to faction spaces. And even if you go out of your way to play it every time it comes up, despite having maybe better cards, you're only getting 3 to 4 spice trickle throughout the game. I just don't think that's high impact enough to really make a difference. At the end of the day, it's nice for sure, but it's not as powerful as some of the other abilities we're going to see coming. And I just think in light of that, it's just not worthwhile of giving him a higher tier spot than what he's at right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, sure, he can help you afford things just slightly out of range, but yeah, in my opinion, it's just not as flexible. And, you know, I'm trying to get into him, like trying to make him work, and it's really hard. It's really, really hard.
Okay, then moving up to the next member of our tier list, and this is going to be Prince Rhombur. And his base ability is called Heavy Laskin Cannons. Your dreadnoughts have 4 strength instead of 3. And then the Signet Ring ability is called Ixian Technology. It lets you buy a tech with your Signet Ring. Or if you don't want to buy a tech, it'll just give you a 1 spice discount on a future tech you might want to buy. So he is in F tier for both of us. Well, actually, no, he's not in F tier for both of us. So he's in F tier for you, Lannister. But for me, I actually moved him up to D tier. I think I'll let you start off as to why you think he is F tier, especially because you're the Rhombur specialist. So you probably have a more in-depth knowledge of him than I do.
Well, for one, he needs a lot of Solari, and in the beginning, acquisition of Solari is paramount. So if smuggling isn't open to you, you have very limited means of getting that Solari. A lot of the times, you got to hit wealth or smuggling and interstellar, and unfortunately, in terms of access to either of those, you're not the prime leader to get those positions unless you're really lucky. Now, the other thing is, if smuggling is not active for you, you're put in a position where you have to use other cards that aren't the research icon. The research icon is actually very powerful in this game. In fact, a lot of leaders that utilize the research icon, they benefit hugely off of that. The trade-off of not using the experimentation and, for example, being forced to use your signet ring or, the recon just to get into combat a little bit more often, that trade-off is actually somewhat detrimental because you end up losing on beetle bumps or Talaxu cards, and that is a huge detriment. Extra resources that you acquire, the extra points that you acquire, it's what accelerates this game. People will say this game ends turn 8. I will say differently. This game generally ends turn 7 because if you're an experienced player, your setup is such that you have a lot of options, and beetle bumps is one of the quickest accelerants to ending in turn 7. So when people are approaching this game and they're going like, oh, they took off the point, so it's gonna end turn 8 instead of turn 7. No, that's not the case. I mean, if things go out without a hitch, turn 7 is where it ends, and that's where Rhombur's main weakness is. He's forced to use his other cards aside from experimentation, unless he gets smuggling. The cards, the quality is so high that when you sacrifice going to tech negotiation or high council in lieu of getting a dreadnought, that is also a big detriment to you too, because you end up not getting the quality cards that you need. So it's often a juggle between which you need more than the other. And that is something that a lot of characters don't have to go through. Like, not a lot of characters are going, well, I should go grab a dreadnought now. And like most people are just like, no, let's go get that, high council. Let's go get that swordmaster. And a lot of his plays require him to get second place in combat, which is ridiculous. Like, who purposely aims for second place in combat? That's just a ridiculous concept to me, and unfortunately, that's the economic situation of Rhombur. He needs to aim for second place in a lot of combats just to fuel his engine, and it's a really tough balance, and it's high difficulty in that situation, I would say.
Yeah, and just to say why Rhombur needs to aim for second, especially if they have the dreadnoughts going, is if you win, you have to send your dreadnought off. You're losing that 4 combat potential. And a lot of the second places give the resources you need to keep your engine going. If you're playing a more focused game with less total actions. You don't have the time to go out and waste a turn on going to still suits or going to get collect spice. You really need to focus things down with Rhombur because he wants to be getting dreadnoughts online. He wants to be getting tech. So there's only so many things you can do during a turn, and the more things that you need to do to succeed as a leader, the harder it becomes to juggle it all. I also think the Signet Ring is pretty flexible. It is a resource generator like Memnon's in that you get a spice for it, just flat out if you do end up using it. And the ability to grab a tech at the same time is a little bit of action compression. So Rhombur can save himself from going to tech negotiation and still get techs. The only issue is, unfortunately, Rhombur wants to be getting dreadnoughts, and if you want to be getting dreadnoughts, you're going to be going to the dreadnought spot, which lets you buy a tech anyway. So the action compression you're getting from the ring ends up being nullified by the fact that you need to go to dreadnoughts anyway. So you end up using that action to get a tech. So in that way, it's not as good, but I do think they can do some really interesting things that a lot of other leaders can't do, like buying techs while going to combat spaces, getting those extra troops, getting those extra swords when no one can really expect it or see it coming. Because if you grab a bunch of spice and grab a tech at the same time, now suddenly, I mean, a better player will recognize that that's a possibility, but if you're going against someone that doesn't realize that that's an option for you, it is easy to forget things sometimes, then you can kind of take off in that way. I think the buff dreadnoughts early makes it much easier to grab these second place rewards over other leaders. Of course, you do have to be giving up early game tempo to get those dreadnoughts online early, but I think a lot of the times that can pay off for you. Of course, the biggest issue for Rhombur's game is going to be the fact that if other leaders are going combat, your ability to generate those resources is going to be so much harder, especially if you see a beast in the game who's just, honestly, I think is better in combat than Rhombur, despite Rhombur being a good combat leader. So the more competition you have for combats, the harder it becomes. But I think one of the metas in Immortality and in Ix as well is going more faction-oriented and trying to just generate a ton of resources. So if other players are playing like that, Rhombur becomes an anti-meta pick of sorts, where now if you're the only one going for combats, it becomes much, much stronger, but it's going to depend on the level of play of the other leaders.
I would say that it is really hard for Rhombur mid to late game, because in Immortality, due to the high potential for combat, a lot of people are grabbing dreadnoughts, and that kind of interferes with you too. That used to be a premier spot for him and exclusively him, because who's going to grab dreadnoughts and Ix and stuff like that, right? So in Immortality, it's like everyone's grabbing dreadnoughts. Like I remember in one particular game, literally everybody and their mother had a dreadnought, and I was like, oh my god, when is it my turn? So the reason I say there's a high chance for combat is because like, for example, there's a card called Interstellar Conspiracy, which allows you to graft a card with a Spacing or Emperor card, and it's got blue access to it, and it gives you a bump and a spice as long as you meet those two conditions, as I said. That allows people to enter into combat without having to go to the access points. And that is why combat is so much more popular in Immortality, because people can go into combat and still get their bumps. And that is something that you have to recognize as the major difference. And that also makes Rhombur weaker in that sense, because more people entering into combat squares is, less squares that you can take up, and everyone's still getting their bumps. You're still getting their bumps, but you have a lot more contested zones than before, and he doesn't have the same flexibility as other leaders.
I'd say as far as ease of use goes, I think we're probably both in agreement that Rhombur is a very hard leader to play well. Just given how many things you need to do and how you need to compress, and you really need to plan ahead. Some of the other leaders, you can kind of just get away with playing round by round and not really worrying about it. But Rhombur especially, you need to plan your resources out for future turns so that you can hit the Dreadnought threshold, so you can hit High Council threshold, so you can hit these different areas. And you need to plan around getting second place rewards to meet those thresholds. So there's a lot more planning, and there's a lot more room for your plans to go wrong if other people play around you. So I'd say a very, very hard leader to play as, but can be rewarding and very fun. I love playing Rhombur for that reason. So
Oh no, I 100% agree. I wouldn't play the hell out of this character if I didn't think it was fun. But it's kind of a masochistic your request for yourself too. I mean, it's a lot that can go wrong and very few things that can go right with this guy. But I love him to death. So we'll keep chugging along with him.
So next up on our combined tier list, we have Ilban, which I'm sure some people will be surprised to see this low. Count Ilban's base ability is called Ruthless Negotiator. Whenever you pay Solari for the cost of a board space, you draw a card. And the Signet Ring ability is 1 Solari generation every time you play the Signet Ring. And I actually had Count Ilban as the worst leader in the game below Memnon. So I am definitely dragging Ilban's rank down here. Lannister, where did you have him ranked?
I had him in B tier.
Okay, so I think since I'm the one that threw off the rank, I should probably start off first with saying, well, I guess I can start off with saying why I think he's a good leader. We should always start out with the strengths, I think, and I do think drawing the extra card from Mentat is going to be one of the biggest uses of his base ability. Mentat already lets you draw a card and gain an extra action, which basically is you just delaying your action by 1 round. By everyone else, it's not really an extra action if you consider that you use an action to go there. So from a deck building perspective, early on, the Mentat can be pretty good. You can go to Wealth, then you can go to Mentat. It allows you to cycle out a Dagger, which is just no Persuasion, for 2 cards that potentially have Persuasion. And if you consider that the average persuasion of a random card from the base deck is usually around 1, you're effectively gaining 2 persuasion by going to Mentat. Obviously, it depends on your current hand, but just for the sake of discussion, we'll say it gives you 2. And 2 persuasion can be a big cutoff for hitting some of the early powerful cards. And also late game, cycling out a Dagger for 2 cards can help you get Spice Must Flow purchases, and it can just help you improve the options in your hand. Because if you think about it, a lot of the times you'll see people, if you watch competitive games, they just draw this absolutely terrible hand. Sure, they can go to Arakeen if it's not already taken, or they can go to Mentat, but usually drawing 1 card isn't going to be enough to improve the quality of your hand that much. So being able to cycle out a card and draw another card is pretty good. Obviously, the Solari gain, 1 Solari from the ring Solari is generally less valuable than Spice. So in that way, Ilban's ring ability is worse than Memnon's ability that gives a Spice. It can enable early Swordmaster if you go double smuggling and play your Signet Ring while you're going there. That gives you a total of 8 Solari, which is the Swordmaster cutoff. The only thing is a lot of other leaders that we'll talk about can also use a double smuggling to get Swordmaster early, so this isn't something that's unique to Ilban. The reason I have Ilban ranked so low is that, like with Memnon, the Solari gain is so slow, you're getting it basically every other round, so you're probably going to get like 3 to 4 Solari throughout the game, which isn't that good to begin with. And then, if you're using Solari for early Mentats, you are slowing down your ability to get High Council and Swordmaster so much. If you consider the fact that you're spending a Dagger to get an average of 2 Persuasion, if you go to High Council seat, you no longer have to spend an action because the High Council gives you 2 Persuasion every single round. And it's usually more of a short-term burst at the cost of long-term game persuasion by getting your High Council seat. Ilban's another leader like Rhombur that's going to require a ton of Solari. I think the designers tried to offset that by giving the Signet Ring Solari gain. I just don't think it's enough. I talked about how one of the strengths of his ability is the ability to get extra persuasion early. I think that ability is just strictly worse than Helena's ability to get early excellent card buys. Helena can reserve a card and makes it immune to the atomics blowing up the row, drawing a bunch of cards in Immortality. If there's a good card in the row, people know what you're doing. They're just going to bomb the row. So I think that really hinders Ilban's ability to perform as well with the early persuasion in Immortality. I just talked a lot. What are your thoughts?
There are a couple of reasons why I have Ilban up at the B tier. Might even be A tier, but so when it comes to Ilban, the reason why I have him ranked as B tier in this instance is because of his ability to cycle out the deck. This is actually very important for 2 reasons. Research Station only gets you 2 cards nowadays, unless you hit all the way to the end zone. So why is that relevant? It's a lot harder to get your Spice Must Flows. It's especially when you got graph cards, and the majority of graph cards, save for 1 or 2, give you 1 persuasion. So Talaxu cards included as well. There's, I think, only 1 other card or 2 other cards that have 2 persuasion. So you're often stuck in the mud there trying to get that Spice Must Flow. It's very difficult. He has that out for you. He can cycle out your deck. He can get you the the right configuration that you need, and that is an option that a lot of characters don't have, and he has an easier time of um, hitting his power cards as well as cycling out to get to his Spice Must flows. This is also a very fundamental part of what makes him a strong leader, because cycling in this case is uh, very important because it's about finding that power card as consistently as possible. Go for spots that allow for specific entry moments. So, for instance, you don't want to cycle your deck when you're about to shuffle it and you've had your power cards played out. You want to have it just at a moment where all your cards are laid out from the top of your deck, and then when your new round starts, you have that opportunity to hit it. And as I said before, the Dreadnought spot is actually very lucrative, even for Ilban, because hey, he gets an extra draw there too. So um, in that instance, it's really strong. And not only that, graph cards kind of pollute your deck. So for me, I like to keep something like 13 cards in Ix at most. It's really hard to just keep 13 cards in Immortality. Like, you'll find yourself stuck with 14, 15 cards. It's really hard to be consistent with 14 and 15 cards. I still struggle with that, but for Ilban, he finds a way to cycle and filter much more easily, and um, that is something that is much more easy when you have a character like Ilban. And there are a lot of cards that give you extra Solari, much easier to acquire Solari than it was in the past. You have a lot more options available for you, so that cost isn't nearly as detrimental as it was in Ix. But cycling is much more important for Immortality than ever before, and that's why I have him up there.
Yeah, agreed. Combo-based play in Immortality is so much higher now that we have all of these different crazy graft combos going on. I think I would be remiss not to mention the fact that if Duke Leto is in the game, Ilban can become worse just because they both want to be going Mentat. Duke Leto has a discount of 1 Solari on all of the Solari cost spaces, so the Leto also wants to be going Mentat, so it can end up being blocked for Ilban, which does inhibit his cycling ability a little bit, but just a little leader interaction to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% correct. When Leto is in the game, I'm 100% agreeing with you. He's probably a D tier or F tier at that point. It's just bad times for Ilban.
So we'll move on to the next leader in our combined tier list, and that will be the good old Paul Atreides. So
Cool.
we have him both. Well, our combined tier list, we have him in D. I have him in the C tier, at the bottom of C tier, and I believe you have him alone in D tier.
Yes, I do. And Link's gonna kill me for this.
Just to cover his ability really quickly, his base ability is called Prescience. You may look at the top card of your deck at any time. And the Signet Ring ability is called Discipline, and it lets you draw a card. Pretty straightforward overall. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
His ability is just so subpar compared to the other leaders. An extra draw on your Signet, great. Well, Benny Gesserit's sister does the exact same thing. Um, you can say his Prescience is good, but Prescience, it can only take you so far, and it doesn't have that same impact as the other leaders. When it comes to Paul, that extra card draw is not as impactful, for example, as say Ilban, who can get repetitive use of extra draws. You need to rely on that Signet just to get that extra draw power on it, and it's a lot weaker than Ilban, in my opinion, for that particular moment, because Ilban not only gets those extra draws, he removes the subpar cards like Dagger, for instance, whereas Paul's kind of stuck, holding those daggers in his hand because he's not exactly going to Mentat with his Signet. He would rather go there with his dagger, for instance, in most situations. So I would say for him, his ability is somewhat lackluster compared to the other characters. His Combat potential is also not really there outside of an artillery build. Um, there are artillery builds that have been used with him, but I would say of all the artillery builds, his would probably be the weakest. Um, he doesn't get you any extra resources of any kind, like um, Ilban, like Memnon or Rhombur or Tessia. So it's just he's kind of stuck in a situation where you know other minor cards that you purchase can pretty much do exactly what he does, and his potential is just not as high, and it's not as large of a power creep in the middle of the game. Like when Tessia hits all her engines at the same time, when she hits all those friendships, for example, wow, what a beauty to behold, right? There is no such play for Paul. There is no, you know, one moment in time where he just combines everything together and just like dominates. So he's just a character you need to be good at and consistent with, and hope for the best. And unfortunately, I don't see much potential in that aspect for him.
Yeah, I often compare Paul to like the Mario of the Dune leader world. He's very flexible. He can do pretty much anything you want him to do, but he doesn't really excel at anything. I do think card draw is a powerful-ish use of the Signet Ring, especially in Immortality, where, like we kind of said earlier, it is more combo-oriented, so you want to be drawing into your power cards and cards that interact well with each other. I'd say Prescience is a pretty solid ability. I think it's often underrated, but getting the kind of information to let you know whether or not it's worth going for that card draw can often make big differences in how your turn ends up playing out. If you're, let's say, 2 persuasion short of getting a really powerful card from the row, knowing that that's your next card in your hand gives you a guaranteed sequence of plays to get what you want done. Whereas if you're a different leader and you don't know what that top card is, it can make it a lot harder to plan around going for the card draw. And then, honestly, you end up wasting card draws going for these big purchases. Going, like, even in the end game, if you're trying to get a Spice Mist flow and you have the option to get one more card draw at the end, knowing whether or not that's going to succeed or whether you should put your efforts towards something else, I think can be a very effective use of it. And I think that is where a lot of strength for Paul comes from. The Signet Ring ability to draw cards is a little underwhelming. Unlike, like you said, Ilban, where you're cycling out a dagger, which has no persuasion, the Signet Ring has 1 persuasion. So unless you're drawing into a 2 persuasion card, you're often going net neutral with persuasion, so you're not buying anything better. You can go to Mentite and draw 2 cards, but you are cycling out a 1 persuasion card, like I just said. And yeah, nothing really game-breaking here, like you were saying. Next up on our combined list, we have Ariana. And she falls into the C tier for us, so this is our next bump in the tier list. Ariana's ability reads, whenever you harvest spice, you gain 1 less spice, but you get to draw a card. And then the Signet Ring ability is called Hidden Reservoir, and it lets you gain 1 water whenever you play your Signet Ring. I actually, I have her lower on my tier list. I have her in D, below Rhombur. So I think I'm much lower on Ariana than probably a lot of people are, which is going to be surprising because on my first tier list, I had her way higher than everybody else. So I've played, since making that first tier list, I played a decent number of Ariana games to try and figure out what's going on with that potential. And it is lower than I thought it was. Water is the best resource to generate from a Signet Ring ability. It's better than Spice. It's better than Solari because it's harder to come by. So as far as the resource generation aspect, it is a good resource to get. The weakness is paying 1 Spice to draw a card when you're playing to collect Spice. I think giving up on that Spice, it's not worth it. That's an expensive cost to pay to just draw 1 card. Look at the Duke's Signet Ring ability, where you're paying a Spice to get a bump. The fact that you are forced to give up Spice every time you collect is worth the cycling ability. Especially if we look at Paul's ability, where you're cycling out your Signet Ring that has a persuasion. When you're collecting Spice, you're cycling out one of your experimentation cards, which also has 1 persuasion. So unless you're hitting a convincing argument or a 2 persuasion cost card, you're usually going neutral or losing persuasion, which is hurting your ability to buy cards. And additionally, and this is where the big kind of drop came for me, the strength of water in Dune is very, very variable. So water becomes better the scarcer it is, which I actually like in this aspect because it is very Dune-esque. If water is very scarce in the game and you're playing Ariana, you're going to have a great time because you're going to be the only one that can get the Great Flat. You're going to be the only one that can go to Research Station. Those spots will generally be open for you. And so you'll be getting a lot more resources and a lot more card draw than everybody else. And you'll be able to hit Hardy Warriors. You'll pretty much be able to like have your way with a lot of the water dependent tracks. If you're in a game where Water Peddler comes off the row early, if there's a lot of water coming from the combats, because there are a decent number of conflicts that grant water to players, sometimes 2 water. If all the other leaders end up having 2 to 3 water, suddenly Research Station is getting blocked every round. People are harvesting the Great Flat Spice, so it's sitting at 0 bonus spice. And the water benefit kind of falls off hard, in my opinion. I think there are scenarios where Ariana will shine, like if Saidina is in the row and you can spend that water on other things. But if other people know what they're doing, as soon as Saidina comes up, they're just going to nuke her out of the row. So I think Ariana has been the biggest fall for me on the tier list just because of how inconsistent water is. And I don't think the base ability is that good. But I'd be very curious to hear what your thoughts are because you have her much higher than me. You have her in the B tier.
That is correct. The card drawing potential for Ariana cannot be stressed enough. She is also the fastest person on the research track due to her ability to hit the research station as often as possible. So she is one of the beneficiaries of the usage of the experimentation icon. So you're correct. It is pretty hurtful to not get that 1 spice extra, but that card draw potential, as well as so when she, for example, just hits Imperial Basin, you get Diddly Squat because she doesn't get any spice in this situation, but you get that card draw, and you also get to move the experimentation 1 step. Now, assuming that you have your ducks in a row, you've hit your research station again. Once you go here, get that water, get that card draw, get to hit the experimentation again. Yeah. So she has the capacity to charge very quickly over to that beetle track. Now, there are many benefits to this. First is she gets first dibs at the table for any premier T-Lax cards. So things like Unrelenting Assault or Stitch Horror or Flaxu Infiltrator. These type of cards are just godlike, and if you're first to get those cards to go with, your engine's just going to be running so fast. So how do I supplement this? So for instance, when you are adapting yourself, let's say you've got the cards that you need, or if other people have gotten your way, you have other options with the cubes that you acquire while hitting the research icon. You can accelerate the beetle bump, or you can also get back troops. I think that is one of the major things that people forget about is as you expend your troops, the biggest problem with people is getting back those troops. She has the ability to use those cubes she's acquired to reinitialize her garrison. And this is where her power comes from. She can constantly hit these points while still being combat heavy. And so she'll hit the tracks to the very end. I think on average, I'll get there by end of turn 3 or start of turn 4, just from the cards I acquire and from hitting, using experimentation and hitting the research track. And why this is important is because as you hit the end of the track, now her experimentation at the end of the track gets you 2 cards. You get 1 for her base ability and 1 for hitting that research at the end of the track. So that's a 2-card draw just by hitting this zone here. And that can't be stressed enough in terms of like the potential for purchasing high value cards or getting the power cards back into your fold. This is like premier stuff. Like, so when that research track, you're sailing across it, you get a lot of resources in between that. You get the cubes for the troops or the cubes for the beetle bumps. You get the potential bump if you went to the bottom of the track. You get the spice if you actually need it. You get to replace an intrigue if it's really garbage for you, or you get to trash twice. It's just a lot of different potential aspects, and that is actually something that is very important. It gives you options. Uh, when you're molding your deck, having options as you sail across to the finish line is really, really powerful stuff. If you manage to get something like a Gola or um, a Quizatch, how awesome is that? That while you're just going with a research icon, that you get to trash two cards along the way without having to actually use a selective breeding or um, another card that cuts cards by itself. Like you have things that along the way benefit you and your strategy. That is the flexibility that a lot of people don't have, and I think a lot of people who play Ariana and rate her lower, they haven't really spammed that experimentation as much as they should. It's one of the premier options in this format, and I would say for her, it's really beneficial for you if you play her out to go and get your Swordmaster as often as possible, because she needs to hit those experimentations, but you also want to get the access points as well. So, I'll probably hit two experimentations, try and get the water. If I can't, then I'll go to still suits, something like that. It's just really powerful stuff to spam that experimentation. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that when they play Immortality. They just kind of want to get the power cards, they want to hit the access points. But overlooking those two elements is a very, very, very big detriment, because those are 2 points that you can get when you sail all the way across, and the resources that you manage and get while doing those things is highly beneficial. Like, imagine going to interstellar shipping, cashing out, getting two troops. At the end of the round, if it's turn 7 coming in, you only have two troops. Well, not really. You can cash out, get another two troops right here. Now you're set to go. It's a lot of flexibility that you're leaving behind by not using the experimentation um, icons, and she just benefits like wildly from that. So that's what I got to say about that. Just as a final thought, if you're using Ariana, her first turn play is, I would say, most of the time, if you have Seek Allies, you go to Still Suits, you hit Research Station with your Signet Ring, then you'll have that water back, and you'll be able to buy a power card. And next round going in, you should be able to cycle into that power card that you had, or conversely, you'll have the um, diplomacy / signet ring to do it once more. So if you're fortunate enough to have your diplomacy or signet ring again, you'll be able to hit the research station one more time. So you'll be accelerating really fast across the track, and you'll be cycling into your power cards much better. It is very important that when you buy cards for her, that you buy power cards that have reveal effects. The reason I say reveal effects is because um, you're trying to hit your experimentation as well as your signet ring more often. So you don't want to have cards that kind of interfere with that and force you to use other cards. You want to have good reveal effect cards, such as let's say Web of Power, for instance, everyone's dream card. But like, just as an example of what cards you should purchase for her to maximize your benefit.
So the next up in our C tier is going to be Princess Yuna. And her ability reads, her base ability is Smuggling Option. You start the game with no water, but whenever you gain Solari on your turn, you increase the amount gained by 1. And then the Signet Ring ability is Final Delivery. You get to pay 7 Solari to get a bump with a faction, get 1 troop, and gain 1 spice. So I actually think we ended up lining up pretty closely here. I have Yuna in the mid C tier, and you do as well. I think you have her at the top of C tier. What are your thoughts?
For Yuna, she's great in the aspect that she has combo potential that allows you to do big plays at big moments. So she falls in that. We're getting in the category where people can do crazy stuff with their signet abilities or their passive abilities, and she's one of those beneficiaries of that. Um, for Immortality, there are a lot of cards that give you Solari bonuses, such as Slake Farmer, and that is one of the options that allow her to accelerate her point track potential. So I think she's definitely among. We're getting to that zone where people are getting stronger, and she's definitely one of them. Um, for her potential, I would say the Slake Farmer or the Talaxu Surgeon. Amongst those cards, like everybody's good with Talaxu Surgeon, but um, the the Solari based gaining cards are much more prevalent for her, and that is one of the reasons why she's stronger in my view in Immortality than she is in Ix. However, the problem is there are characters that do those things that she does that just is easier to perform for the others than it is for her. And that lack of one water, although it doesn't seem like it's a huge deal, is a major, major issue in Immortality. A lot of people um, have come into that meta where you go research, you go still suits and hit research. She can't do that. If you're in first, second, third, fourth position, you're SOL. Like you can't really do anything about it. Like you just have to bide your time and hope you get to buy something decent in the uh, peasant-like ways. You can't just get that research station turn one to grab something good. And a lot of people like hitting still suits, regardless of whether they go research station. So you're often last to acquire that water unless you start entering combat that provides water. And I just think it's a very hard time for her in terms of that. Although her Signet ability allows her to get a lot of good potential off. Um, there are cards like the good old Chris Knife, Organ Merchants. Those type of cards are supplementing her capabilities much better. Um, but unfortunately, she's still not quite there in terms of like the flexibility that the other people have.
Yeah, I agree. She is good at generating Solari. That's kind of her shtick. It can help with getting an early Swordmaster, High Council. She is one of the leaders that benefits from a double smuggling into Swordmaster play, if that's what you're into. The ring is a powerful effect. Generating bumps when going to any spot can be very big, especially now that Immortality has introduced more grafting cards that allow you to send that ring over to a faction spot, potentially getting double bumps and doing these kind of crazy plays that Lannister was talking about. Especially if you consider getting the Emperor Alliance bonus, getting 3 extra troops whenever you send a thing in. If you consider you get 2 from the Emperor, 1 from the ring, that could be a big swing of troops that people aren't necessarily. I mean, it is a little telegraphed, but sometimes people don't expect it. And an issue that some leaders can run into in the late game is not having something to do with all the Solari they're getting. If you have your High Council, if you have your Swordmaster, and even if you're getting Mentats, you can still end up just having ways. So Yuna does have a way to dump a lot of that excess Solari, which can be nice in an effective way. And like Lannister was saying, benefits very highly from cards that grant Solari when you play them because you are gaining Solari on your turn. You can effectively double or increase by 50% how much Solari you're getting from these cards, which kind of fuels that High Council Swordmaster engine more and enables the Signet Ring more too. So there's a lot of great synergies with cards in the row. If they grant Solari, kind of going back to the weaknesses, not having the water is a really big deal, especially if you consider that other people are interested in going to still suits. So she can be very hard on the resource generation side of things to get things going, especially the other water spots, Siege Tabor. You need to influence with the Fremen to go there to get the water. And if people are going still suits and you don't have water, you can't go Hardy Warriors. And Hardy Warriors can be a very powerful spot in the opening round because if it's a good reward from the first combat, usually whoever hits Hardy Warriors is just going to win. Getting the 4 troops in, if you follow up with more troops from a different spot, you're going to win that first combat because people don't have entry cards yet. They don't have a lot of troop generation yet. So Yuna does miss out on that side of things as well. The Signet Ring ability, if you compare it to Duke Leto's, because let's be honest, the big reason you're using her ability is to get the bump. Duke Leto's ring ability, you're paying 1 spice to get a bump. which is a lot easier to hit than 7 Solari. So it is, in a way, worse than Leto's. Of course, it does let you get a bump anywhere, whereas Leto, you have to catch up, but I still think it's just overall worse. So while I do think she can do some fun things, she's just not on par with the leaders we have above her, which is why she ends up in this tier.
For Yuna specifically, I would say that smuggling is one of your top premier locations to go for. Unfortunately for her, a lot of people are just going to get in your way, and that's why you're going to have to find ways around it. This will be dictated by the cards on row. Get your Chris Knives, get your Bounty Hunters, stuff like that, just so you can bypass through that Solari starvation. She needs it a lot, and I would say that it's important for you to hit the Imperial track pretty quickly. The game ends generally by turn 7. You want to hit that top of that track to get that, bonus before the line, and at the right moment you use the Signet Ring to get that bonus 2 troops, and the day should be won there. If she's in position 2, she's going to have a good time. She's going to get to smuggling, and then she's going to get to wealth, and next turn she's going to have her Swordmaster and High Council, because when you go smuggling first turn, you'll have 2 Solari there. Then you go to wealth, you get another 3 Solari, that's 5 Solari. When you go back to smuggling, you're going to have cash out of 8 Solari, so you'll have 13 Solari total. So you'll be able to go to Swordmaster with 1 turn and High Council with the other. So ideally, position 2 Yuna is really solid. She'll have both her Swordmaster and High Council, as long as people don't get in your way. But unfortunately for her, she has a lot of people who would block her or inadvertently get in her way by going to the wealth section. So unfortunately on that aspect, she's much more predictable than most leaders, just because there's so few limited spots that give you Solari. And I would say that's why she's a mid-tier to me.
I'd say she is a very fun leader, especially if you can get some of the more fun Solari-based strategies going. Appropriate can be a very, very fun one, especially because you're going with the Emperor anyway, so you're going to have that threshold met to buy text with Solari, which can just be a fun way to play. It's another way to dump all that excess Solari you're getting as well if you're not interested in using the ring. So very fun, very different play style. So I think she shakes up the game a lot in what she can do. But as far as the pure power perspective, yeah, I agree. Mid-tier as well for her. Okay, moving on. We're moving up to the B tier, and this is going to be our Ecaz tier. But yeah, so we have Armand and Ilesa. We'll discuss Ilesa Ecaz as well. This is another one where we're actually fairly close on this one. I think we both think she's pretty good. You have her ranked higher than I do. But before that, let me tell you about her ability, because she is one of the more complicated leaders for sure. Her base ability is called One Step Ahead, and at the start of the round, you're going to set aside a single card from your hand. And at the start of your second turn in a round, you'll reveal that card to everybody, return it to your hand, and then if you use that card to send an agent this turn, if it has exactly 1 agent icon, like the dagger, for example, you get a spice. If it has more than 1, then you get 1 Solari. Like most other cards. Signet Ring, for example, would give you 1 Solari. Relevant to keep in mind that this card you're setting aside, let's say you change your mind when it comes around to your turn, you cannot pull that card back up and use it to play with. It is staying stuck down until your second turn. So kind of something that I see mistaken. I used to make that mistake as well before I had a decent amount of experience. So the Signet Ring ability is called Guild Contacts, and it lets you pay 1 Solari to get 1 Fold Space card. So I have her ranked at the, let's see here, at the top of C tier, and you had her where? Okay, yeah, you had her at the bottom of A tier.
Yep.
Okay, so strengths. She is the best leader at resource generation out of all the other resource generating leaders. Basically, instead of getting a Signet Ring that you have to play an agent to get the resource from, she's getting it every single round, regardless of whether or not she's playing a card into it. Of course, the drawback being that you have to really plan ahead to use it effectively, but it's so flexible in that you can get Spice or Solari from it. Spice is the better resource, so generally you'll be wanting to go for that one, but let's say you need 1 extra Solari, so your double smuggling play, that gives you 7 Solari. You can get 1 more to get your Swordmaster. those kind of scenarios come up, but absolutely the best of resource generation. And then the fold space cards. And this was an issue in Ix because I just didn't think the ability was that good. People wanted to go to fold space anyway to get interstellar shipping access. So do you need 3 or 4 fold spaces in your deck throughout the game? Not really. And paying a Solari, while it's not a huge cost, it is a cost. So I always questioned whether or not, and I feel like I would skip the Signet Ring ability a lot of the time with her, which if you're playing a leader for their abilities, skipping half of the ability is obviously pretty poor, but her base ability does end up paying for the fold spaces, which makes it better. And fold space as a card is so much better in Immortality now that grafting is a thing, and some of the synergies you can get going with fold space is just nuts. We already talked about Slig Farmer. There's a lot of other grafting-based cards that become so much stronger if you can send them anywhere. But some of the weaknesses, and this is more of a game design weakness that I always complain about with her, and which is why I don't end up playing her on stream very often. It's just the fact that you have to sit down before anyone else can do anything at the start of every single round of the game and think about, where do I need to be going with my second action, which not only requires you to plan what you want to do with your first action, but what you think every other leader at the table is going to do with their first action so you can make the most effective use of the card you put down. It can be very analysis paralysis, and I feel like it can hurt the experience of other players at the table, which that's more of a game design weakness. That's not a strength thing. So I'll leave that out of the tier list approximation, but it is a complaint I have. And then having to commit a card early and losing access to that card for the first round can be detrimental if the game state changes in a way that you wish you could play that card now. That can arise sometimes. If you're planning accordingly, hopefully it won't be happening very often, but it's another weakness I have with her.
She is the queen of grafting, as we say here. She has so much potential for her. Like, as you say, she has the flexibility of the resource gaining spice of Solari, depending upon which one you do. One thing a lot of people don't realize is you can use the grafting card as the card that you're hiding. So what do I mean by that? If you put this as your card that you're going to use, you can technically still use this to graft on a fold space. So you still get that one spice, but I don't necessarily need to go to a triangle spot. I can still go here with the fold space. She is so powerful in that respect because she gets resources like crazy, and she gets discounts for you like crazy. And if you think about it in that context, selective breeding has now effectively cost you 1 spice, as long as you had that 2 spice to begin with. That is huge. And not only that, she has access to fold space like no other character, and that fold space for grafting purposes is so strong. Let's look at this combination to begin with. Assuming you manage to get level 1, which is not too hard. You go to selective breeding. This is 2 cards from that, and another 3 cards from that. That is a ton of cards that you're getting. 5 cards in total that you're getting from 1 hit to selective breeding at discount. That is insane. Now, let's look at the other combination. You have Beguiling Pheromones and Fold Space. Well, Beguiling Pheromones is like a power play for your card, but you got to kill the card in order to do so. Oh, well, that's just too bad. You lost the Fold Space. So what? You got that extra bump. So strong. Now, you got that Fold Space into Twisted Mentat. A lot of people are complaining that you don't have enough cards to supplement this. Well, you know what? Fold Space just gave you a card back. You're in good shape. And, we just talked about Slig Farmer, Dissecting Kit, all these other combinations. Basically, she can, if you see a grafting card and you're Ilesa, you should just grab it. It's like, there are very few cards that are a bad choice for her in terms of grafting, because she has so much flexibility. Like that one Solari, whatever, you're getting it back. That's what you need. Solari, you got Solari. You need Spice, you got Spice. She is so strong in that aspect. I can't even stress on that. Like selective breeding for effectively 1 spice, 5 cards. It's insane. She gets cards that she needs. She cycles back into cards she needs. She instantly gets you back to square one with your deck situation. And on top of that, she has the ability to be fluid with which resources she gains. And the grafting card matters because a lot of the grafting cards only have one symbology, as you can see, and that supplements her one spice situation. So she effectively does things that Memnon does, except Memnon needs that signet ring to be played to get it. She gets it every round she plays. Like you're getting it every round just on the reveal round, and that's insane. That's effectively 7 spice if the situation goes to 7 rounds, if you so choose.
Okay. And now our other member of B tier, I think we have them both pretty equal in this tier. It's going to be the other Ecaz. This one is Armand Ecaz. And first of all, the base ability is called Coordination. On your reveal turn, if you have at least 2 agents on a green, blue, or orange board space, you may trash one of your cards in play. In play being a key word there. It's not from your deck. It is one of the cards that you used or revealed that round. And then the Signet Ring ability is called Conscript, and it allows you to acquire a card that costs 3 or less from the row, or one of the base cards, Arrakis Liaison, for example. I have personally ranked Ecaz as a B, so he falls right into where I have him, and you did as well. So I think we're pretty in agreement as to where Armand Ecaz should go.
So Armand Ecaz has gotten stronger in Immortality than Ix. He's gotten a lot more card combinations to work with. There's a lot of power cards that are 3 cost and below that you can snap up that are really amazing. I'll give you example, Tlax Surgeon, really strong stuff. You snap that up, it's a guaranteed 2 points in hand, and it just accelerates you really quickly. Deck building is a much bigger thing in Immortality than in Ix. And the thing with Immortality that is different from Ix is that in Ix, if you have a card combination and I know of it, I can still stop you. So let's just say, for example, you have Smuggler's Stopper. I can block any desert location, and you can't play that card, and you're stuffed. But in Immortality, the difference is there are grafting cards that go alongside other combinations that make it very difficult to block. So even if I know you have that card combination, you can't step in front of it necessarily. It's really difficult. Like Smuggler's Stopper and Interstellar Conspiracy or Gola, for example. Like you can't block all the city spots and you can't block all the desert locations. So he's much stronger in this format because there's fewer ways to block him and his combinations, and he gets to cut the cards out really quickly. And so he is one of the characters that can wheel off very fast with a high potential. And if he gets a hold of those really good cards, either low cost or high cost, whatever it may be, he has that potential to just take over games instantaneously. Now, why is it that I don't have him at A tier or S tier? The reason being is because you still need a little of time to build off that combination. And that is where the difference is between a veteran player and a newer player. Veteran players all aim and target turn 7 typically as their ending point, and that is when Ecaz generally gets the strongest. So he's building up and he's wheeling off, and his combinations are such that by turn 6 it's very apparent that he's gonna like destroy the table. But unfortunately, turn 7 is also where most people are getting everything. They're getting their beetle bumps, they're completing their friendships, they're going into combat for 2 points. It's very easy for you to watch the game state and it being at 4 points for everyone universally and going, I'm safe, I got time. No, it's not safe. It's very common for a 4-point start for everybody to turn into one person getting to the 10th point. The beetle bump is a point, 2 friendships is 2 points, a victory in the combat is another 2 points, that's 5 points, an intrigue or a spice was flow is a 6 point. And you're probably wondering, how is it possible that this person gets all these things? These cards that you buy have potential to get you bumps in the city spots. So Interstellar Conspiracy, Test of Humanity, those type of cards, they get you into combat and they still get you bumps. And that is the danger that a lot of people don't recognize, is when everyone's sitting at the odd part of the friendship track, they just suddenly balloon everything while still winning combat. And that is the distinction in Ixen or Immortality that a lot of people don't recognize. They go, well, if he goes, to the Axis points, then he can't get combat. But no, now you have the ability to take combat while still getting bumps. And that is where Ecaz has to be very careful with his deck building. His deck building is still limited in time. It isn't any more time than you thought, because everyone thinks that you got 1 point taken off and from the starter point, because that's how everyone plays. So I should have more time to build with him. Your time is still very limited, but the cards are much more powerful, and his combinations are extremely difficult to get in front of. And that is where I think he has grown in popularity as well as his win percentage, because of those crazy combinations and those unblockable combinations. But what prevents him from being S and A tier is just he needs time, and unfortunately some characters just don't give you that time.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Just to kind of reiterate, I think trashing is much better in Immortality, like you said, because it's much more combo oriented. An Armand Ecaz that gets an early Gola, for example, is a potential nightmare for everyone else, especially if they can grab cards that just do broken things with it, like Long Reach or Rever Mother Muhayyam, or just all of these different options that if Ecaz is able to trash his deck down enough and consistently play some of these combinations, that actually they can just skyrocket off the late game. Like you were saying, they are a more late game oriented leader, in that as they trash more and more and get these high tier cards, they really start to skyrocket. If you're playing with less experienced players, I do consider Armand to be one of the more noob stompier characters, because if they don't know which cards are good and they aren't willing to atomic some of the excellent cards, you can start building that insane deck earlier. And if the game's going on longer, obviously you have more time to make use of this. There is a trap that people fall into, like you were saying, of taking way too long of building the perfect deck, but not actually converting any of that into points. And that is one of the big traps with Ecaz. But if you're able to get the trash off consistently, you can kind of hit a nice middle ground where you have a good deck and you're scoring points. And I think that's where he really shines. There is a sort of kind of, what's it called, battle you have to do where you want to get off trashes early, but you also want to be getting points with the different factions. And obviously, if you only have 2 actions and you hit a green, blue, and orange spot, you're not going to the faction tracks. So big beneficiary of early Swordmaster. Early Mentat as well is a way to enable you to get off more trashes in the early game, because like most things in this game, engine building aspects like card trashing are going to have a bigger effect earlier in the game as you can wrap through. So especially with its signaling ability, there are some really, really good 3-cost cards in this game. And lower. In the Shadows has always been an excellent card. Guild Bankers. There's just a lot of really like S tier cards that you can snatch up before other people have an option to. Obviously, picking Armand Ecaz in the opening because there's a strong 3-cost card is very vulnerable to other people atomicsing the row, which if there's a Guild Bankers in the row and they see you're playing Armand Ecaz, if it's a good player, they will atomics it away. So a little bit hurt in that regard.
There are two schools of path of how you use him. I think I use the trash early, Swordmaster late of a playstyle. So I'll hit Mentat early, and I'll start trashing stuff really quickly. And the unfortunate aspect of things, I lose out on Swordmaster. And so early on, I'll trash an extra 1 or 2 cards, and other players who play in the opposite spectrum will have the better longer term trashing ability. But I think it's always good to take it into an early game advantage. I think there's a lot of potential for opportunities when you do things in quick combination, and that's why I tend to have a lot of instances where uh, I win on turn 6, turn 7, but I also flame out a lot faster too. He's not too difficult to use, but it's also important for you to know when to switch off. Um, as a general rule set, I would say build and cut for 3, maximum 4 turns. If you're doing anything in excess of that, you're pretty much screwed. So don't be too excessive in terms of cutting cards. You gotta know when to stop, and I think that's the only major difficulty in how he's played. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And now we're moving up into the more exciting tiers of our tier list. This is going to be the A tier, and our first member of the A tier is going to be... Hold up. Do you wish I uploaded more Dune Imperium playthroughs? Well, good news. For only $3 a month, you can become a member of the channel and gain access to a bunch of extra members-only Dune Imperium playthroughs. And of course, you also help support the channel and my ability to keep making high-quality board game videos. Thanks for listening, and now let's get back to those juicy A tier leaders. Our first member of the A tier is going to be Viscount Hundro Mortani. Base ability is Intelligence. At the start of the game, look at the top 2 cards of the Intrigue deck. You keep one and you put the other one back on top. Very relevant because not only do you get to pick one of the better Intrigue cards between the two, but you also know whoever gets the next Intrigue card, you're going to know what that card is. So potential information there going along with Intelligence. The signet ring is Couriers. It lets you spend 1 spice to get 1 bump on the shipping track. So I have Hundro as a tier, or no, I have him at the top of B tier actually. So I have him a little bit lower than you. You have him at the bottom of A tier. So we're actually pretty close in that regard. Just a slight tier difference. And I will be interested to hear your thoughts. As far as strengths for Hundro, we can talk about his base ability first. The ability to get 2 Intrigue cards off the stop. While it is a one and done kind of ability, so you're not going to get a continuous benefit, Intrigue cards in this game are very, very powerful. They can break the game in a lot of ways, and leaders that can take advantage of that are going to be in a good position. And not only does Hundro start with 1, but he starts with the better of 2. So you're getting a higher than average Intrigue card with the ability, and you get to know the Intrigue card of the person that gets one next. So the effect is obviously going to be you have more information, but sometimes if players are playing heads up, it can discourage people from wanting to get that next Intrigue card because people don't want you to know what their Intrigue card is. So sometimes that can stagger people out from wanting to go Carthag early. It can be a bit of a game of chicken, waiting for somebody else to take it so you can get the next fresh Intrigue card. Because if you look at it from their perspective, not only will you know what their card is, but it's also a below average Intrigue card in that it's the one that the Hundro player didn't want. So in that regard, it can kind of control the early game a little tiny bit. If people know what they're doing. And then one of the real big strengths, and this is kind of what Lannister was talking about earlier with the combo potential of signet rings. Very, very insane combo potential as Hundro. He can just do some crazy things. You wouldn't think paying 1 spice for a bump would be that relevant, but when you consider that shipping bump can give you troops, can give you bumps with factions, and can give you resources, and it can give you a tech. So it can unlock so many different insane combinations. For example, if you go to a combat space, you buy the tech that gives you 4 troops. You get 2 troops from collecting. You could get a bump with the Emperor, get 2 troops from that. You can just throw in an entire army of troops out of nowhere. And you can do this on a smaller scale too if all that stuff doesn't line up. That, and in addition, the shipping track is just so strong. It was strong in Ix. It's still strong in Immortality. Being able to get bumps when you're not able to go to the shipping track is just strong for resource generation and climbing on the different tracks. He's a very, very powerful leader. I think he's really good, but just wasn't quite as good as the leaders I have in A tier. And then the fact that you have to spend a spice for that shipping bump can be a little prohibitive sometimes because, especially in the early game, it will require you to make an Imperial Basin trip to get used out of that. And if there's a Duke Leto in the game and they want to spend 1 spice to get their bump with a faction, which I would argue is a slightly stronger signet ring ability, just getting the bump straight up, that can weaken things a little bit. And obviously everyone's always going to be competing for the shipping track, so it will hinder the ability to set up these combinations a lot of the time. But another potential noob stomp leader, if people don't know how good the interstellar shipping track is and you're able to dominate with Hundro, you are going to roll the game. You're going to beat everyone so quickly. So very, very powerful leader, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
there are a lot of leaders that have the ability to hide and win on the offset of a well-planned organization. Hundro is probably the strongest in that regard. He's not quite S tier in the sense that Tessia can repeatedly get these bonuses, or Baron can wheel off and get his points really quickly, really fast. But Hundro is that one character. If you time him really well, he can win off of 3 points or 4 points at the start of a round. Here's my example to you. Um, One particular play where you've been setting up with Hundro is the ability to hide your current points. So if you take a look at the current situation, you'll see that I just pushed him just below the line. I have 2 from here, and I have 1 here and 0 here in front of it. So assuming that you managed to work your way up to the top of the shipping track, and you had Boundless Ambition or the Signet Ring, let's just be generous and say Boundless Ambition. If you had, I think, something like 3 spice, yeah, 3 spice should be enough. So if you went here, Boundless Ambition, and you went here, okay, you got 4 troops here. You pay 1 spice, drop down, pay, get the spice, get 2 more troops, get to pick a track of your choice to go up, and you get to buy a tech at 2 discount. So Shuttle Fleet being 1, pay all 4 spice, and voila. In one combination, you just got 1 alliance, bump here, 3 points. That's 1, 2, 3 points. And if you win this combat, that's another 2 points. That's 5 points right there. And that's just from one move potential. Just from one move. If you're not fortunate enough to get something like Shuttle Fleet, whatever, it's fine. Like, the whole idea is in one action that compressed so much in one availability for you. Not only that, he's strong in the aspect of desert research icons being heavily profited from going to interstellar or smuggling. There's a lot of ways to bypass being blocked now, like Talaxu Infiltrator, for instance. There's so many combinations that make him specifically benefit from these situations, and just being able to utilize those benefits to great effect is an amazing outlook for this character. His setup does require some time, but his potential to get a lot of points in one shot cannot be expressed enough. He like, if you see a Hundro player and he's sitting at 3 points at the start of turn 7, look at the tracks, make sure they're not all odd or whatever. He's probably setting up at that point. And as you saw, like in that one combination, that's 5 points if I win. And like, I just stuffed in 8 troops in one action. Like, good luck with that. Like, I'm not even including other actions subsequent to that. Like, I potentially could go Carthag or grab a Dreadnought or whatever it may be. It's just a lot of potential off of condensed actions. And anytime this character is to be used, he needs the setup plays. It's important to bump up the Imperial side of this guy. He is by far a very hard character to play with in terms of timing, also in terms of knowing when to drop down with the ring. It's easy enough to play with to get the resources, but he's really hard to time everything correctly, because you have to know when to kind of give up on specific situations and still get the resources. But it's also important to recognize when you do the killing blow.
Okay. Next up on our tier list is going to be Helena Rachis. So her base ability is called Eyes Everywhere. Enemy agents don't block your agents at green or blue board spaces. And the signaling ability is called Manipulate. Remove and replace a card in the Imperium row. During your reveal turn this round, you may acquire this removed card for 1 or less. Little rules aspect here. The Manipulate is a mandatory one, so if you play your ring, you do have to remove and replace a card. I see some people choosing not to, but this is a mandatory one. Let's see here. I have her at the bottom of A, and you have her at the top of B. So similar rating situation that we just ran into Hundro. I think we just have them swapped. So I think Helena's a little bit better. You think Hundro's better?
For Helena, I think her main power is not just to grab the great cards. It's, as I said before, combat is much more lucrative for track chasers because they can, in combination with graph cards, get the bumps they need by going to city accesses. Now, city accesses are pretty limited. There's only really 3, 4 if you can count research station. It's not a very ideal spot for putting in troops, but she doesn't care. She just goes in any spot, and now she has the advantage. So she's gotten stronger yet weaker. Weaker in the aspect that she can grab cards, but those cards may not be there in time for her. They might be blown up, like, before when Kwisatz is on the row. When it gets to her turn, she's just going to ring it. So long, so too bad. But people in front of her can blow that up with atomics, and that's where her capabilities have kind of dropped. She can't reasonably ring out things as planned. She can still ring out things, and hope for to plan for something else, but her planning capability in terms of I'm going to save up for 7 and ring out Kwisatz, that kind of goes out the window with Immortality. But her combat potential is so high in Immortality, and the benefit of being able to get bumps while in combat cannot be stressed enough. Her ability in that aspect is amongst the best. Her only limitation, I would say, is her ringing ability is just far weaker, and it doesn't cheese as much, and obviously it feels bad knowing that you're not the only person at the end of the day that can deny good cards and stuff. So yeah, I would say for her, she's definitely stronger in Immortality through that combat potential.
Yeah, I think Helena is the best deck building leader in the game. I know Ecaz is very good with his trashing and everything, but look, even if there is an insane card in the row, which usually that's why you're picking Helena, so you can pick up a Kwisatz Haderach or a Lady Jessica or something. Even if people atomics it away, it's important to know that you have an atomics as well, and you can go fishing, which obviously is not ideal, but in early still suits to Signet Ring Research Station, drawing a bunch of cards, getting a really high persuasion hand, and then if someone had atomics it and you don't like the current selection, you can just atomics again, and usually between a 10-card sample, you're going to find one decent card to buy. Her ability to hit high persuasion thresholds and buy power cards early is unmatched, not only because the Signet Ring, playing it, you do lose a persuasion from your reveal, but you get it back and that it discounts the card. You're also not blocked at tech negotiation, so you can, whenever you want, turn a dagger into 1 persuasion. Obviously, you're not blocked on any of the city spaces, which makes her a very capable combat leader as well. And as far as the deck building side of things go, a lot of the graph cards have city access as their only access, so her ability to just shove her way in there if she really wants to play one of these powerful grafting cards is another strength that she has. Obviously, similar to Ecaz, the nuke ability does limit her kind of monopoly on the Imperium row and her ability to acquire cards early unless someone wants to early reveal for a card. But I think she can kind of overcome that kind of using her own atomics to see what she can pull up. It's obviously a little bit less reliable of a way to go about it, but you can usually hit something pretty nice. And the name of the game with a lot of these early expensive cards is you want to get them as early as possible, and Helena can do that better than anyone else. The earlier you get it in the deck, the more times you're playing that card, It lets you build the rest of your deck around that card if it's as insane as it could be. And I think she just has immense ability to just kind of build these awesome decks that no one else can do. And she'll run into a similar scenario as Ecaz, where if they spend too long building this crazy deck and they never turn it into points, they will just lose straight up. But I think you can come up with some really fun scenarios, and not even in just that kind of deck building. You can also go for just a super high sword strategy, hitting kind of selective breeding over a go and trashing that way. If you want to go for a higher persuasion strategy, text like disposal facility can enable that very well. She has a lot of different ways she can go. She can go combat, she can go spice must flow, and I think her ability to just go to any city or blue or green spot just makes her very, very powerful. She's not as combo oriented as Hundro. She is more of a kind of consistent, do whatever you want and see how it goes kind of thing. But I think that is a very powerful aspect to her play. And that's why I put her into the A tier, just because of how consistent and strong that can be in the right game. Yeah. And not that I mentioned it, but also if she can win an early Carthag or Era King combat, because she's not blocked there, you can end up generating an extra Solari if you want to just pound a spot that someone already hit. But
oh yeah, I actually remember a particular match where I think it was the economics supremacy game where you need 6 Solari and 4 Spice to get all the points. So as you say, that's a good point. Someone went to Carthag, and I control a Carthag. I got 1 Solari. Then I went to that place, and then I urgent missioned off of it and went on to it again, and that was 3 Solari right there, and it's fulfilled that condition. So it's a lot of extra resources that she can get, and that's a really good point that you stated, is that she has a lot of potential for extra resources. So for Carthag, Arakeen, or Imperial Basin, those are premier spots for her, and I think that was an awesome point that you pointed out there. So Arakeen and Carthag are definitely prime spots for her.
Okay, so now moving on to the exciting tier. I'm sure the tier people are most interested in hearing about, although probably not as different from Ix as most people would like, but I think it's a little bit different. And starting out at the bottom of S tier for our combined list is going to be Duke Leto Atreides. Base ability is Landsrad Popularity, and whenever you send an agent to a green spot, the space costs 1 less. And the Signet Ring ability is called Prudent Diplomacy, where you pay 1 space, you gain 1 influence with a faction where an opponent has more influence than you. So on my tier list, I actually had Duke Leto as the bottom of S, and you had him at the top of A. So a little bit of a difference in opinion on this one. You don't even have them in your S tier lineup. Duke Leto is another one of the leaders that has the advantage of hitting double smuggling in the early game to get 7 Solari and get Swordmaster, because of course Swordmaster is discounted. But it's even more flexible in that not only does he get the discount at Swordmaster, but he gets a discount at every other Solari containing spot. So Duke Leto loves hitting Mentat 1 Solari to cycle out a dagger, which is generally kind of useless in most cases, and being able to cycle that out into a card that has 1 or 2 persuasion can be very relevant in the early game. And it's 50% the cost of other leaders, which is a huge discount when you think about it. Duke Leto can go for a pretty interesting combat orientation as well. Dreadnought's only costing 2 Solari. Pretty big discount. They are able to hit that threshold much easier while still being able to hit some other Solari containing spots, well within the possibility of Leto going to Wealth and then immediately going to Dreadnought and having their Dreadnought army set up early so they can get those kind of second tier combat rewards that we talk about Rhombur doing. So in a way, I do think that Leto is better at utilizing Dreadnoughts than Rhombur is, just because it's so much easier for him to get them. Additionally, outside of just the base ability, which is a very strong base ability, he also has an insanely strong Signet Ring. I think this is one of the best Signet Ring abilities in the game, in that you can pay 1 spice to get a bump as long as someone else is ahead of you. And this is super relevant and a scary Signet Ring ability to play around. First of all, and this is kind of a big differentiator between a lot of the S tier leaders, this enables Duke Leto to get really early interstellar shipping access. They can use their Signet Ring ability to catch up with the person leading on fold space, because let's be honest, if Duke Leto isn't the first one to fold space, someone else is going there before him, so he can pretty easily catch up to the 1. And then on their next turn, if possible, they can play Diplomacy 2 fold space to get to that 2 level. and get interstellar shipping going. Even if they're in 4th position and someone else has early interstellar shipping access, you can just use that signet ring to catch up. So in that regard, it's good because shipping is insane. But additionally, going along with the kind of combat potential of signet rings, how we were talking about with Hundro, signet ringing as Duke Leto to interstellar shipping and collecting that bump, if you use that first bump with a faction to catch up with somebody else, and then you take the other bump on top of that, very easily able to pass people on alliance tracks. And it requires people to play inefficiently against you in that they'll have to take bumps where they already have an alliance just to prevent you from possibly stealing it. And additionally, Duke Leto is a big, big beneficiary of grafting. If he's able to graft his signet ring to one of the faction spots, that's another essential power play like action where you can get double bumps with factions and pass people. It is a very, very strong one, especially with if you can get another one, if you can get Boundless Ambition going as well, and you're able to just take free bumps all over the place, you are just going to run away with the faction access. So well, in fact, that's why I have him in S, because of his ability to do that. Additionally, some weaknesses, and I think this is somewhat of a weakness of some of the influence-oriented leaders in this game. They're still very strong. They're still in the S tier. But just the fact that there's so much more faction influence floating around in Immortality, it's a lot easier for the other non-influence-oriented leaders to get alliances. And the strength of these leaders is their ability to get alliances and close out games early. So if everyone else is going for their own alliance, that's just going to hurt your overall early point output and make it harder for you to close out games early. Obviously, they're still very good, but the round where they can have these super early wins because they have 3 or 4 alliances, it's just much harder now in Immortality unless you get some of these broken combos. But so that will, I think, overall nerf some of the ability of these leaders, but I still think he's just insanely strong with a lot of good combo potential.
I think you're still having nightmares about that game with Black Shadow when he was playing Leto.
Possibly.
I think if we go back to that game, I think he took 3 out of 4 alliances. Only you held on to an alliance with the Bene Gesserit against Pidge. It was insane stuff. Like as you said, he jumped everywhere. He was beguiling pheromones. He used his ring. He pretty much went everywhere, and that's where his strength lies: is his ability to chase people down. I mean, you were just one from the top at spacing, and he just pounded away at you, and with minimal effort, it was just effortless in terms of the way he chased all of us down. And not much else to be said about that. He's a great track chaser. The problem I have with him is, as you mentioned before, everyone has the ability to chase down a specific alliance, and that is where the weakness comes in for him. I think he's still an amazingly strong character, don't get me wrong. That's why I have him at A tier, not S. It's just so difficult to grab multiple alliances now, because if you look at a lot of the games are basically every track is hit to the very top. And this just so happens because everybody has access, even not going to access points. And it just becomes very difficult for them to chase down on a consistent basis multiple tracks. Before, if you're sitting at the 4th line, you're in decent shape to keep at least 1 or 2. But now it's just that you got to push it all the way to the top, or it's a no-go. So for that aspect, it becomes a little bit weaker in terms of his alliance chasing potential, unless he has a lot of good cards like Black Shadow did in that particular game. With respect to his combat capabilities, he is one of the strongest. As you said, he gets early dreadnoughts, right? There is a particular setup with him that is so strong, and it has worked out very well for me, and I'm going to let everyone in on this. And at the expense of an Immortality tournament coming out, I'm going to ask for a little commission from anybody who uses this technique. Okay, so Carino Jeans is a T-Lax card, only one cube to purchase, and upon purchase it gives you 2 Solari, and it also gives you a beetle bump when grafted when going to the Imperial. So we're not interested in the grafting portion of it. We're interested in the 2 Solari it gives you. So If it's in the starting Tlax row and you have that up there, your first action will be to go to Wealth, get 2 Solari, and then your next action will be to go grab that Dreadnought. And your last action upon reveal will be to grab the Carino Genes card, which will give you 2 Solari. At the start of your next turn, you go back here for the Dreadnought, and now you have 2 Dreadnoughts. And if no one has hit Hardy Warriors, you've just hit 2 Dreadnoughts and 2 troops into combat. That is at the start of turn 2. You already having 2 Dreadnoughts, and your last action on turn 2 is to dive in with those Dreadnoughts. So I use this combination, and there's a lot of potential here because you're basically controlling the combat situation. Like you're basically flooded with troops at that point because even if they block you at Hardy Warriors, you can still go Still Suits, put 6 troops in, get the secondary rewards, or go to any one of these locations. It is such a strong combo. I have held people down for 6-7 consecutive rounds just because I had such a strong start. I mean, dealing with 2 Dreadnoughts at the end of turn 2 is a really difficult task. It requires coordination of the whole table just to police you. And oftentimes people are just like, you know what, forget combat. Like, if I have to deal with 2 Dreadnoughts and a troop just by one action, like, what's the point, right? So in a lot of the formats, you can control that situation, and his potential is so great now because the timing of it is that Dreadnoughts are much more applicable in Immortality, and for him in that situation, like you can easily get off a lot of easy early combat combinations, and you save a lot of troops. And I think the resource management of troops is a big thing that is overlooked. Winning a combat is nice, but losing your troops in the process often leaves a void for the next combat where someone else takes advantage of it. But here you are putting in, just on an Air Keen visit, 8 strength, and that's the starter. And if you win that, you still have all your troops from before and 1 less Dreadnought to work with, but you get the resources management alongside with it. So it's very powerful stuff because you're constantly winning combat with a lot of troops still being in contention. So you still have the ability to hit access points. And he has his Signet Ring that allows him to chase down in areas where he was slowing down because he was going into combat. So very strong stuff. That is one of my favorite starters. I think it's a great way to start off, and try it out. I'm sure if you see that combo and you apply it, you'll also see great results too.
Yeah, can't agree more. Especially because we talked about in our Rhombur guide how big of an issue it is, the faction climbing aspect, because you end up missing out on the different 2 points from the friendships with the different factions because you're so focused on getting your spice engine going, getting your water, getting troops, and all that stuff. Dude, Leto can just do it passively as he's playing his Signet Ring to the spots you want to be going to anyway. It really balances out his ability to be a combat leader, and I think he does it so well, like you were saying.
Yep. And the benefit of the Carino Genes combo is, unlike the Imperium row, you can't blow it off. If someone wants to take it, they have to take that card specifically in order to deny you. And so it's one of the few things you can plan for and go, yeah, you can only stop me if you take the card yourself. And if you have no particular use for it, it's a dead card in your hand. So,
So moving on to our next level of the S tier, we have the quote-unquote most complicated leader in the game, according to the publisher's ranking system, and that's going to be Tessia Vernius. So her base ability is called Careful Observation, and at the start of the game, you're going to put a snooper token at the 2 influence point on each influence track. And whenever you reach a snooper token by getting to 2 influence, you will move it to the topmost uncovered space above and take that reward. So for example, if you reach 2 influence with the guild, you'll cover up this top spot, which is discard 1 card to gain 1 spice. Next time you reach 2 influence, you'll collect that token and you'll get the bonus from that token's influence track. So the ability does kind of scale up as the game goes on. And then we also have the Signet Ring ability, which is called Duplicity. And this allows you to take a bump down with any faction to gain 1 influence with a faction where you have a snooper token. So this is going to be any faction where you haven't already reached 2 influence and collected the token, basically. On my personal tier list, I had Tessia at the top of A, and you have her at the bottom of S. So slight discrepancy there. You have her higher than Duke Leto by a spot, and I have her lower than Duke Leto by a spot. So while still close, we do have a slight difference there.
So Tessia is great not just because she can track chase very proficiently. She is great in the aspect of 2 other different things: the bonuses that you get and reversibility of bad investments. So Leto is great, but Leto is also stuck in a situation where he's overcommitted. He's lost that alliance. That's it. He's got nothing for him. He wasted all that time and resources, even though it was only 1 spice or whatever. It's still an action here or there that he had to do in order to do so. Tessia is here to say that I wasted all this time, so what? I can push that all back and go for another person. I can be a pain in the butt for somebody else, or I can take something else. Her ability to hit repeated bonuses is also not to be forgotten. She has a lot of combinations going for her, especially as a final bonus to get to that Emperor track. Very strong stuff. She's often the one to end the game by virtue of that alone. She just goes to the signet ring, gets to the second level of Emperor friendship, and bam, another 2 troops, and now she's 1 below the Emperor track, and it's very easy to find your way to get that Emperor bonus yet again. So she often has the most troops in combat by turn 7 because she gets a bonus 4 troops, 2 from her signet from hitting the even at the last bonus of the snooper token, and another 2 from completing that alliance boost, either through intrigues or a combination of cards that give you that Emperor boost. There's a million ways you can do that, and that economic boost she gets is just so valuable. And the reversibility of all that is why a lot of people value shifting allegiances so much. Is she has her own mini shifting allegiance, and at no expense to herself. Like, shifting allegiance requires 2 spice to work with, but she has her own shifting allegiance that just pushes away and goes like, hey, I wasted my time. No, not really. I was not planning to challenge you at all anyway. It was just a matter of making you waste your resources. She is by far the biggest thorn in Beast's hide because he has to protect himself, but she doesn't really care if she fails either. And her only weakness, I would say, in Immortality is, as said before, it's really hard to earn multiple alliances. But even in that instance, she gets so many bonuses, and that covers for her bases because those bonuses help her get things quicker, like more Solari, more water, more intrigues. All those things work in conjunction with making her end game potential much higher. And I would say that that's one of the biggest gripes about people picking Tessia or Baron, is because she's not as easy as Baron to use, but she has so much going for her, and her ability to recover from bad situations is second to none. So I can't stress enough that she's an S tier character.
So I guess since I have her a little bit lower, I will stress what I think is the reason she doesn't make it into S for me during my kind of explanation. But just to kind of echo what you were saying, I do think she is a very strong leader. A lot of the influence-based leaders are just powerful in this game because they can get you victory points. She is one of the leaders that benefits from early shipping. She can use her signet ring to shift influence from a faction that's usually less contested, like the Emperor. If a Fremen spot bump she has, she can just shift that over to the guild. And then if she can make her way to full space, that is the interstellar shipping access for her. She especially benefits if the first combat is a reputation gain combat, because then she can go Hardy Warriors, win the combat, and then use her signet ring to shift that to the guild, She uses the bump from the combat to gain another bump with the guild, and now she's the first one with interstellar shipping access. And it is a very powerful combination of moves to get her there earlier than everyone else. And she benefits so much from interstellar shipping because she wants to be getting as much bumps as possible throughout the game. If you think about the fact that in order to collect a snooper token, she needs to get 2 influence with a faction. In order to collect all of those snooper tokens, she needs a total of 8 bumps split out amongst all the factions, which can take a while to get to. So anywhere she can squeeze out more is going to be very strong for her. And she, in that way, she's also a pretty good combat leader because she can go to the Fremen spots and use the combat potential of those and shift them towards some of the less desirable spots. Like, people usually don't want to be going Emperor a lot of the time unless you get a specific benefit from it. Bene Gesserit is another one that tends to be a little overlooked at times. And she can kind of use the stronger spots and then shift it away to those, which is pretty helpful. I'd say the issue, and you kind of touched on it as yours as well, everyone going for their own alliance early, and a lot of the times they'll max it out. Tessia specializes in spread influence. She is very good at gaining a lot of influence with a lot of different factions, and it's why Plans Within Plans is so good with her. Sure, she can shift, but once she collects all of her snooper tokens, she is no longer able to shift any persuasion around, so this Signet Ring kind of dies in that respect. And if you think about the final result of what she gets from all of her bumps, she gets 2 bumps. She can discard a card for a spice, but not as relevant. And she gets 2 bonuses from tracks. The bonuses are nice. You can get a water, you can get some troops, and you can combo that to get the troops into combat, which is nice. But if you think about how long it takes her to get those faction bumps, if you compare her ability to get those bumps to someone like Baron, who can get those 2 faction bumps with 1 action by going to Hardy Warriors, it's just so much slower. And in a game where everyone is maxing out their faction influence super early, I think a lot of the time those bonus bumps aren't going to be doing much for you, which is a little bit unfortunate. In Ix, she can endgame super early by climbing up all of the different tracks pretty quickly and getting multiple alliances and shutting it down. Same with some of the other influence climbers as well. But I just feel like Immortality, her ability to do that has declined drastically. And if the other players are playing around your ability to do that, it's going to hurt you a lot. And I just don't think that, I think those weaknesses puts her below Leto and especially the Baron for me, just because of how long it takes. That being said, if she can get some of these power plays, if she can get Tome Directorship, get all of those bumps super quickly and get to that 8 bump threshold to get all of her snooper tokens, I think she's back at being insane and being able to close out games early. I just think that happens maybe less often. I mean, there are more cards that give influence, so maybe it's easier than I'm giving it credit for, but I've just seen a lot of games where Tessia's kind of spread themselves too thin, which is kind of natural for what her kit does. And then she just either gets 1 alliance or gets no alliances. And but I do think she's a very good leader. That is why she's in the A tier for me, above Helena, who I think is a very solid leader. I just don't think she quite meets the power threshold to get into S tier. But she does require planning. She's another combo-oriented leader that can do crazy Hundro-like things where she's getting troops, throwing them in, and getting different bonuses so she can do things. And especially with her Signet Ring being able to shift things around, I just think that aspect of it can be pretty fun to play around and plan around, and it makes it a little bit harder in that regard. But
to that end, I think you're also correct about the aspect of her requiring the good cards to make things work in terms of that. That's part of what makes her great is the atomic situation. And I think that's the distinction there between you and me is the belief that she'll get what she needs immediately because of the atomics. For instance, I can hunt for a power play, I can hunt for a treachery, or I can hunt for shifting allegiance. Those are much easier to acquire for her than ever before. And I think that's part of the discrepancy there between you and me. And it's easy to see why that we have that slight distinction.
And now we're getting down to the final 2, and we do have some variability here as well at the tippy top of S tier. And our next leader is going to be the Beast at the 2nd position in the overall tier list. And the Beast ability, his base ability is called Arrakis Fiefdom. So he starts the game with additional resources. He starts with 1 spice and 1 Solari. And the Signet Ring ability is called Brutality. When you play your signet ring, you get 1 troop, or if you have at least 1 faction alliance, you get 2 troops. So reading this, you think, okay, doesn't seem as crazy as some of the other ones. Why is he ranked so high? I actually have him as the number 1 strongest leader in the game, above the Baron and Duke Leto, which may be a little bit controversial. You have him in the middle of A tier, right behind Duke Leto and ahead of Hundro. So a little bit of variability there, and I think it was probably my ranking that drug him up into the S tier. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. So why did I rank the Beast so high? I think the Beast has just improved. I think relative to the other leaders in the game, Immortality has helped Beast the most. So let's talk about the base ability first. Getting 1 Spice and 1 Solari kind of seems like nothing, right? But when you think about what it allows you to do, I've talked about during this tier list how certain leaders can get 1 extra spice so they can get a 2-cost tech. The Beast can do that just starting out. He can go tech negotiation, get whatever 2-cost tech he wants, just like Memnon, just like Rhombur. Additionally, starting with 1 Solari, he can also do a double smuggling play early, get 7 Solari plus the 1 he has to go early Swordmaster. So just like that, he also has Yuna's and Ilban's ability to get a very early Swordmaster going, which is incredibly relevant for combat-oriented leaders. Additionally, I talked about how, we both talked about how the fact that in Immortality, there's a lot more faction access bumping around. It encourages people to want to push up with 1 alliance and kind of go all the way up to the top, locking that alliance down. And it does hurt the ability of the different influence climbing leaders to get multiple alliances and shut the game out early. I think the Beast, who wants to get 1 faction alliance and just lock it down, this is playing into exactly how the Beast wants to play the game. He wants to just climb up. Usually it'll be with the Fremen because he gets water and troops from that. Get his alliance, superpower his signet ring, which one of the few signet rings to actually scale up as the game goes on, and kind of just pound combat over and over again. There are a lot of good cards that give faction influence while being able to go to a combat strategy, and that just benefits the Beast. Additionally, that extra troop that he gets from the signet ring, huge difference maker in early combats. I talked about earlier how a lot of the times whoever goes Hardy Warrior in the first round is just going to win the combat because they can get the most troops in. The Beast getting an extra troop can turn Carthag and Arakeen and these city spots that give a troop into a Hardy Warrior spot. Just like that. Enables him to compete and get troops back incredibly efficiently. He can hit a lot of key timings with different rewards from combat because he's able to replenish troops easier than other people. And his ability to get that early tech with a combat strategy can be so huge. Early Mnemonic film, for example, getting a little bit extra early persuasion so that you can get more powerful combat cards and build up your strategy that way. I think in a meta where the faction-oriented leaders are very strong and in a competitive scene, I wouldn't be surprised to see Leto, Tessia, and Baron all in a game together, kind of hampering each other. I think the Beast becomes a very relevant counter-meta pick where everyone else is going super heavy for the alliances and everything. If they leave you alone to take over combats, you are just going to be in such a strong position. So I think in the Immortality meta sense, the Beast kind of rises to the top over the other leaders and just has immense flexibility with these starting resources that kind of gives him the abilities of a lot of the lower tier leaders in addition to just being able to generate troops to take down early combats and get victory points that way.
I am in complete agreement with you on that aspect. His abilities are amplified further in Immortality. It's actually interesting to note what you said about the techs in the early game techs. I have a specific strategy with Beast, and it is the only character where I've achieved the turn 5 win twice with that character. I've never achieved that again with anybody else. And both times with Beast. He is one of the strongest in combination. He has as those cards, as you said, ability to hit the combat squares as well as get the faction bumps. Just to name a few, let's say Skilled Compact and Stitch Horror. in conjunction with in the shadows or something to that effect. Like that's just value on value on value. It's just a lot of capability to drive up those access points while going into combat, and as you say, the scaling is a big difference. And his potential to come back from the access points, because he doesn't need to fight for anything more than one alliance. In the past, him chasing that one alliance is potentially detrimental because Tessia can take 3 alliances, and you're left fighting out to see if you can win the day. But now everybody has the ability to take one alliance for themselves. It's much harder for faction track chasers to completely monopolize the situation. And as you say, this has strengthened his hand. And I think what separates him from the S and the A is other people can join the fight too. And while he is often the strongest, he has to recover at some point. And that's where the weakness of him is he has the strength and capabilities to maintain and sustain, but he has to take a break. And sometimes when you're taking a break, other people jump into, but other people are going to be recovering and waiting for you too. And when you come in, they might mob you as well. And I think that is where his potential drops, because other people are also now going to combat because of that variability. I think for him personally, he benefits a lot from the graph cards, a lot more than other characters do, because his signet is just so strong. I mean, the Stitch Horror for one, the T-Lax Infiltrator for another, um, Interstellar high priority travel. Um, Even if you don't buy many cards, he's still solid, and that's why he's a great 4th position pick as well. Um, he doesn't need a lot of good cards. In fact, if he didn't buy any cards, he'd still be a great leader, because you can try and hit your Signet Alliance, and voila, there we go. At a later stage, I'll go into that 5-turn win strat, but suffice to say, it's he's really strong. His early game tech acquisition of artillery or wind traps, mem quarters is just undeniable. It gives him that early game advantage. He is by far one of the easiest characters to use. In fact, I have regrets of being a Rhombur player many times when a beast is there, just because he's just wheeling in every round, and I gotta plan out a first or a second place win, and he's just winning every fight. It's just insane. And as you say, he's very deserving of a high placement.
Okay, yeah, I agree. I think he is a very easy leader to play. I should probably recommend him in addition to Paul and Memnon as like easy beginner leaders, and obviously he's very good. And the design of the leader kind of gives you instructions on how you should play it. You should get that alliance, soup up your ring, kind of go into combat. It's very thematic, and I think it's a very well-designed leader, and very strong as well. And then moving on to the tippy top of our tier list, our number 1 S tier leader. Once again, I think I had him as S tier in the last tier list as well, and that is going to be the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. Base ability is called Masterstroke. At the start of the game, secretly choose 2 factions. When you deploy 4+ troops to the conflict in a turn, reveal your choices and gain 1 influence with each. And the Signet Ring ability is called Scheme. It lets you pay 1 Solari to gain 1 intrigue card.
So as we said before, the whole spamming of intrigues, the hardy warrior into 2 additional bumps, access to interstellar as soon as possible, all great stuff. His true strength is in the implementation of the new intrigue cards, which has simultaneously strengthened and weakened him. So how is that possible? The most powerful intrigues that he can acquire are obviously Plans Within Plans and Corner to the Market. Those are 2 of the strongest intrigues in the game, and if he gets a hand on either one of those, it's usually game over. In lieu of that, there are a lot of new intrigues that provide VP bonuses. And now he doesn't have to go fishing as hard as he did before. Like he has the ability to get those bonus points and just sit on them. And for example, we have here economic positioning. We have a Talaxu puppet. Those conditions are difficult to meet, but you have time to meet those conditions, and they don't hurt your chances either. Like let's say you have War Chest. War Chest doesn't require that you spend the Solari, and economic position also doesn't require that you spend those Solari. So they can go hand in hand with one another. They also have study melange. I mean, just having 3 spice at the end of the game, that's just not that difficult to meet. And so you're in a situation where you're diluted, but you're still strong because you have additional 3 or 4 options for endgame VPs, and he doesn't have to fish as hard as before. And let's not talk about the alliances, because alliances, you just need to fill up one, and you're easily hitting all the friendships very easily because you got interstellar shipping. You're going to hit the interstellar shipping quick, which means you're going to hit the research track a lot more quickly than the others because they can't get access to this as fast as you. And by you hitting the end zone here, you can chip away at 4 quality cards by cutting out cards or getting the beetle bumps. This is why a lot of players like choosing Baron in Immortality, is because he has the capacity to get the bonus points from the beetle bumps, and he has the ability to get cards very quickly from the Talaxu tracker because he's constantly using his research icon. And although the intrigues are still highly variable because of the new implementation of new cards, he has more options than ever before for extra VPs. So he's not stuck banking on just the plans within plans or corner of the market. Like, obviously he still wants those as well, but just the combination of that, like, everyone fears a Baron not because he hit 10 points, it's because of how many endgame points he has at the end of the game. And it is so difficult to stop someone from going to Carthag and getting two intrigues, one from his signet ring and one from that. It's just ridiculous.
100%. And our combined list having Baron at the top, I cannot disagree with. I think him and the Beast are very close, but I'm not surprised that he might edge it forward a little bit, even though I had it different on mine. Every part of his kit is just excellent. His ability to gain 2 influence at the start of the game, pretty much whatever he wants, as long as people aren't crowding Hardy Warriors, is just insane. Getting interstellar shipping going as fast as he can by going to full space and then hitting Hardy Warriors to reveal a guild bump. The resources you can get out of that, compounded with the bumps and everything you get, the resource bumps you get, or not the resource bumps, the faction bumps you get from that. Where I talked about other leaders, all the other influence leaders having a hard time because everyone's shooting up and getting alliances before they can kind of get more than one, I think the Baron is in a place where he can get to alliances somewhat reliably. If he's the first one to get interstellar shipping access, starts hitting that, gets the guild alliance, can easily get the Fremen alliance off the back of that as well, because usually these Baron players will be picking the Fremen token and the guild token as the 2 they want to get bumps with. I don't think he falls victim to that aspect as much, because if you're the first one to get an alliance, usually that will discourage other people from chasing you. So him getting up there super quickly kind of gives him the tempo he needs to stop people from wanting to compete on those tracks. So he'll usually get those alliances. And then, oh my gosh, the Signet Ring ability is so good. Intrigue cards in this game are insane. A lot of them are very good. The ones that aren't that good still have some utility. And his ability to generate them at the cost of 1 Solari is just so good. They give you victory points. They give you combat potential to get victory points and resources. They can give you persuasion, which can help you buy better cards. They can give you resources. It's such an insanely strong ability that even Pidge's Clown Baron strategy, where you're just hitting secrets and using your Signet Ring and going to Carthag over and over again, getting 10, 15 intrigue cards throughout the game, which realistically, that strategy should not work. If you think about it, that should not be a valuable strategy, but it is because of how strong intrigue cards are. Even a strategy like that can give you enough potential to win games. Because even if someone steals one of your intrigue cards, you have 10 or 12. Like, it doesn't matter if someone goes secrets and steals one. Such a strong leader. They can do, like, their base ability and their signaling ability is insanely strong. They're just good. They're just good at what they do. And that's why we have them at the top of our tier list. So
just some interesting stats in case people are playing Baron. When you go grab an intrigue, these are the following chances. So if you're going for combat cards, it's roughly a 1 in 5 chance of hitting a combat card. If you need a faction bump, it's I think something like 1 in 8 or 1 in 9. And a VP card is roughly 1 in 10. So the rest is like supporting cards, supplementary cards, stuff like that. So if you see a Baron with 4 cards in hand, there's a pretty good chance one of them is a combat card. And that combat card usually averages out to about 3 daggers. So just some kind of interesting stats for you to use in case you're kind of wondering if that's the right play, or should I move in on Baron? What are my odds? Stuff like that. It's definitely really hard to guess what you need to do with Baron. I think his other potential is, as we kind of vaguely expressed, it's really hard to kind of figure out what you need to beat him. You know, you end up overcommitting a lot of times, and if you were right in guessing how much he needs, he doesn't even need to spend it, right? I mean, let's say he has 10 daggers in hand, he's got the 11th dagger in to make sure you save the day. Well, he didn't have to spend a single penny. He can save it for the next day. And that's what makes him really strong. And as Orski said, if someone steals an intrigue, so what? I paid 1 Solari for it. I lost 1 Solari effectively. So it's definitely a really tough time for people. I mean, look at the competition. When we go to the tournament, Baron win all across. It's just easy time for Baron.
Okay, so Editor Orski here. Just figured it'd be worthwhile giving you one final look at our combined tier list. And if you were curious to see exactly how each of our individual tier lists looked, here they are. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this video was helpful to you.